and share the screen. Okay. You can see the screen, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, as I said, in the real world, people's willingness to pay is not written on their faces, obviously. That's an absurd assumption. Sometimes you can tell from their group affiliation, like if they're a student, if they're a senior citizen, if they're an Indian citizen versus an American citizen, but those will be crude predictors of their willingness to pay. It won't be perfect predictors, right? So yes, they can do some degree of price discrimination, like charging different prices for the textbook for the US edition versus the Indian edition. But there are limits to how much that can be pushed, right? So they're even within large groups of consumers, like the entire American market, for example, they have to charge a uniform price. So that's a lot of consumer surplus that could have been extracted, but is not. Yes. So the monopolists are always on the lookout for clever ways of practicing price discrimination under asymmetric information when they don't know the willingness to pay of each consumer. Here are some examples, right? And then I'll do a little model to illustrate what is the common logic in all of these examples. Airfares. Now, this used to be more pronounced in India. This screenshot I took from, I think, more than a decade ago, but it's useful, so I keep using it. These are from yatra.com. If you're trying to book a ticket from Delhi to Mumbai through their website at that time, 2012. Oh, wow. Okay. It's not a decade old. I mean, the way you can tell this is from a long time back is that notice the name of the airline, right? Kingfisher. Those were the days. Okay, now if you were buying more than 2 weeks in advance, these were the prices, the best prices that Yatra was offering. If you wanted to buy closer to the date, look at how the price changes, right? Less than 2 weeks advance. Notice close to doubles, right? 75% higher, 7,000 something. And to different degrees, we face this, right? If you have to buy a last minute ticket, the price is often higher. So why do they do that? Yeah, that's one question. Well, here's another. This is a book, The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. Some of you may have read it. It's very grisly and gory. Scandinavian crime fiction has become very in thing all over the world. And this is one of the famous books which made the writer famous after his untimely death. Now, you go to Amazon's, I went to Amazon's website at the time and looked up the prices. Hardcover, $26, paperback, less than $10. So the hardcover is more than 2.5 times more expensive. So that should lead us to scratch our heads. Now, of course, the hardcover is a little bit more expensive to produce. You have to provide a more durable cover, but surely I think we don't need to sort of debate that the cost is not this big. The cost difference between the hardcover and the paperback, they are almost the same. And many of the fixed costs, like the author's fees, royalties, etc., are the same across the two kinds of editions. So what's going on? Why this big price difference for the same book?
So maybe they appeal to two different markets, two different customer bases.
Okay. How are they different?
The demand for the hardcover is generally lesser, so the seller proposes a higher price to gain as much profit as he can.
So see, there's a reason I chose this title. This is basically pulp fiction. Okay, this is not the collected works of Charles Dickens or William Shakespeare. There, you might imagine that some wealthy guy wants to buy those collected works for his library. So he wants a durable, good-looking edition with good printing, leather-bound, etc., etc. It's for keeps. Whereas, a student who's studying English literature just wants to get a cheap textbook, is to study Macbeth, so buy the cheapest version. There's not much money in my pocket, so I'll study it, and once the exam is over, I'll throw it away or sell it used, etc. Okay, but for pulp fiction, I think very few people will want this as a display item to be bequeathed to their children, right? This is just a racy read, and after you've read it, you don't care that much. I think that's the preference for most people. So it's very hard to explain this big gap. Even the rich will say, I just wanted to read something over the weekend.
So generally between
Say that again?
reader, excuse me, so generally between readers, the common consensus is that paperback is for people who want to read the book, and hardcovers are usually for people who want to keep the book.
I understand. That's the point I made. So that's what I'm trying to, that explanation is what I'm trying to bypass by my selection of the title, right? That one can imagine that would be a strong factor if you're talking of literary classics like Shakespeare. But for pulp fiction like this, which almost everyone just reads and tosses aside, the collector value is perhaps fairly limited. Yeah, some people, diehard fans, may want to keep it in the library and hand it to their children, but there will be very few such people, I imagine. So that, as I said, that's why I chose this title, right? This is pervasive. You can go to Amazon and create a little sample of your own by clicking on various titles. You'll see this as a common practice.
So another argument could be it's just a marketing strategy to make the paperback book seem more appealing in pricing.
Okay. So it's a better deal. It's a framing effect.
Yes, exactly.
Oh, this is possible. But here's something you will observe if you look at these cases on Amazon, for example. Here's product details. Look at the date of publication. Hardcover, January 1st, 2008. Paperback, January 1st, 2009, a whole year later. And this is no coincidence. You click on title after title, hardcover comes out first, is priced a lot more. And the paperback comes out almost a year later, and it's less than half the price, right? So it's not that the hardcover doesn't sell. Amazon sales rank, of course, you can see from the sales rank that the paperback sold more. It has a higher sales rank. But it's not like, the hardcover was just there for the show. It also sold in the first year. After the first year, it kind of drops significantly. So what's going on? What's going on is, yes, they are bringing down the price. But if they brought down the price right from date one, then this being pulp fiction and not Shakespeare's collected works, most people, almost every consumer, will buy the cheaper version. So by creating this 1 year gap, what they're doing is that they're sorting out the die-hard fans who cannot wait to read the latest from this favorite author, versus the ones who don't care that much. They'll say, okay, I'll watch it later, right? We do it with movies, right? If you're a die-hard fan of some Batman series or Salman Khan films, you can't wait to watch it because you want to participate in the buzz and the discussion. So they're cleverly using the time gap to price discriminate, right? Who are the diehard fans who want to pay more? Because the loss from waiting a year it's reasonable to assume will be higher for the diehard fans who have higher willingness to pay, right? The willingness to pay and the cost of waiting are positively correlated. They're not independent. And that is the correlation they're exploiting to practice price discrimination through the back door. Another example, coupons, pervasive strategy. Okay, you have a price in the store or for the online order, but there are these surreptitious deals that you can go to some other website. Yeah, this is absolutely, if you're traveling a lot on buying plane tickets, this Yatra coupon code, that Yatra coupon code, price my, what's it called? Whatever, hotel.com. They all have these discounts hidden in various websites, and it's a hit or miss, right? You will, if you have tried these things, you'll see that, if you go to a particular website, they'll list a lot of coupons, and each has a success rate, right? So this worked 56% of the time. So 44% of the time it didn't work. So to take advantage of these coupons and the discounts they carry is often time consuming and energy consuming. So why do they do this? Why don't they, if they have hidden a 10% discount coupon somewhere, why don't they just lower the price by 10% and lure the customers in?
I mean, sir, the people who don't want to make an effort for it can buy it at a higher price then, and people who are making an effort for it to find that coupon get it at a lower price, because if they lower the price at altogether, then everybody gets to pay a lower price. But in this case, we are only lowering price to people who are making an effort to find that coupon code.
Yeah. So basically, once again, what they're exploiting is a correlation between two unknowns, right? What is a consumer's willingness to pay for a product, and what is the consumer's cost of waiting for that product or searching around for coupons? Okay. So if you think that people with higher willingness to pay are in general rich people, business people, they have a high opportunity cost of their time. That's why they, and they're backed by their corporate accounts or whatnot. They have high willingness to pay, but they also have low willingness to wait. Their cost of waiting is, or search in this case, right? The very busy executive, the CEO of a company will find it extremely costly in terms of opportunity cost to spend an hour searching for coupons for the business meeting he has to attend in Bangalore. So that's what they're doing. They're giving a discount, but if they gave the discount, it was easy to get. It was right there in the store pricing. Then everybody would choose the discount. Who wants to pay? Even rich people, they'll pick the lower price. So they have hidden the lower price somewhere, and to find it, they've made it costly, and that makes sure that the budget conscious people spend the time and the energy to find the coupons and buy at a lower price. They wouldn't have bought at the MRP, at the higher price, and the richer, higher willingness to pay people don't bother. So it's a way to bring in price discrimination through the back door. Let me mention one final example. This is in a paper by Preston McAfee, and it's a very funny example. Xerox company, the leading manufacturer of photocopy machines at the time, certainly, and maybe even now. I don't know what the position is now. But anyway, Xerox company had different models, right? They had a faster model, 10 pages per minute. They had a slower model, like 6 pages per minute. There was a significant price gap. The faster model cost much more. It turns out that they basically build one model, the fast one, and they spend some extra resources to slow it down. So the 10 ppm machine is what they manufacture, which comes out of the assembly line. And then some of them goes into an extra facility, which spends some more resources to slow it down. So that's a classic example of building, artificially raising some cost to price discriminate. So let me show you a sketch of a model which captures this. So this model has two types of consumers. There are high value consumers. The willingness to pay is VH, which is a high number. That proportion is alpha. And there are low value consumers. Their willingness to pay is VL, and the proportion is 1 minus alpha. So these parameters are known to the seller, the monopolist. What the seller can't tell is whether an individual consumer belongs to the first group or the second group. And that is what creates the problem. And that's the realistic situation firms often face. So consumers' valuation is private information. I, as a consumer, know whether I'm willing to pay VH or VL, but the seller doesn't know. Simplify matters, cost of production is zero. Now, one strategy for the seller to adopt is a uniform pricing strategy. Right? You don't try anything cute or clever. You just choose one price. Since you cannot tell people apart, it has to be one price. And so the only two candidates for optimal pricing are VH and VL. Okay, if you charge VH, you'll make higher profit per item, but you'll only sell to the high valuation guys. And if you charge VL, you expand your market base, you sell to everyone, but at a lower price, right? So you face a trade-off between profits and margins. And let's assume that VL is greater, right? So alpha is low enough. So there's a lot of budget conscious consumers, 1 minus alpha, so that the optimal pricing is VL, right? If you could do nothing else, you want to set the price at the lower level in order to capture the entire consumer base and not leave anybody out. That is profit maximizing. Okay. Now let's bring in some extra element into the model, which is the monopolist can impose a burden B on consumers, which consists of delay, coupons, etc., that we have talked about. This is an artificial burden that the seller can create. Okay, so the question is, what kind of selling strategy will he adopt, and will he use this burden? Now, from a straightforward perspective, sellers, it's not in the interest of sellers to impose an unnecessary burden on consumers and reduce the value of the consumption for them, because they can only charge a lower price correspondingly if they lower the value of the purchase or the experience. So off the bat, it's difficult to see why this burden, placing this burden, will be relevant. Why they will make fishing out these coupons so hard, why they'll bring out the paperback after a whole year. Why are they doing it? Yes, they're making that purchase less valuable for their consumers, and as a result, they're losing out on revenues and profits, it seems. But here's an assumption which captures the spirit of all these examples that I was talking about. Let's assume that the cost of the burden, CH, is higher for high value types and lower for low value types. So precisely the people who are willing to pay less are the ones who face a lower cost of standing in a line, searching for coupons, etc., etc. That's the positive correlation between V and C, willingness to pay, and the cost of the burden. So how do we formulate this problem? Now we'll think of the monopolist offering a menu of contracts, exactly like they do with all these examples I've talked about. It's creating a menu for consumers that there's not one way in which you can buy it, right? You can buy it early and pay a higher price. You buy it later. You can get it at a lower price, but you have to spend 2 hours searching for the relevant coupons. All of that stuff, right? That creates a menu. So in the model, we will assume that the monopolist wants to create this sort of menu. There's a higher price, PH. If the consumer chooses that higher price, then no burden is placed on the consumer, right? You get it immediately. You don't have to stand in line. You don't have to search for anything. You just put down a credit card, pay the high price, walk out with it. And the second option is a lower priced option, but there the burden has to be borne by the consumer, right? It has been added to the deal. Now, the way this kind of problem is formulated is that this whole thing pays off only if it managed to create sorting between the two types of customers. High value customers choose one of these options, low value customers choose the other option. And intuitively it's obvious that what you want to do is choose the high value guys, choose the first option, the high priced option without a burden, and the low price guys, the budget conscious buyers, choose this option. So the monopolist ultimately wants to maximize his profit, okay, which is the same as revenue because we have assumed away cost of production. So if this menu has been set up correctly, then alpha fraction of consumers, the high value types, choose this, 1 minus alpha choose that. So the prices are PH and PL respectively. So this is the overall revenue or profits of the consumer. But maximizing this requires certain constraints to be satisfied. The first two constraints are these two inequalities: incentive constraint of the high type, incentive constraint of the low type. This says, these two inequalities basically say that faced with this menu, the high type finds this option more attractive, and the low type finds the cheaper option with a burden more attractive. And that's what these two inequalities are captured. So the first one is called the incentive constraint of the high type. The second is called the incentive constraint of the low type. Together, they guarantee consumers through their choices will reveal whether they're high value or low value, right? Exactly as in the examples that we talked about. You also have to satisfy two further inequalities, which are called participation constraints. Which means that the high type finds this the more attractive option, but there's always a third option, which is not to buy. So we have to make sure that the more attractive option for the high type is better than not buying. So that's why the first inequality. And we also have to make sure that the most attractive option for the low type is also better than not buying. Yes, so that's the second. So these two are called participation constraints. So the monopolist's problem is to maximize his average profit or expected profit or aggregate profit or revenues, subject to setting up a menu, constructing a menu of options, one with the burden, one without the burden, one with a high price, one with a low price, so that self-selection constraints or incentive constraints and participation constraints are satisfied, right? So then different groups will choose differently, and this is. So what we need to study, and I'm going to end here because I've run out of time, so I'll have to pick up the slack maybe at the beginning of the review session a little bit, but let me just end giving you an overview of how this problem is solved. Essentially, we have to look hard at these constraints, okay? And through step-by-step reasoning, we can argue that two of the constraints are redundant. They can be dropped. We can formulate the profit maximizing condition, dropping two of the four constraints, and it still remains the same problem, essentially. You get the same solution. And the other two constraints at the optimum point will hold with equality. They'll be binding. That's a second argument you can make. So the solution goes in that manner. You identify which of the two constraints are redundant, and I will tell you, and then you identify which two constraints are relevant, but hold with equality. Now, the moment you identify the two equality constraints, there are two unknowns you're trying to solve for, pH and PL, okay? So basically, you're down to two equations, which you have to solve, and the moment you solve them, you get the values of pH and PL. Okay, so we are going to look at this detail. I thought I'll be able to wrap up this, but I wasn't able to. But think about this, think about the formulation of the problem, and we'll tie it up. Can I